So Marlon and I have talked about kind of doing a tag team of sermons. And I'm going to talk, jumping off of where Marlon was last week, talking about the relationship between parents and children. And I decided, and I kind of decided this before I knew what Marlon was going to be preaching on, that I wanted to talk about relationship. And I thought, I hear a lot of stories in the line of work. And I hear about all kinds of broken relationships. I hear about the divorces. I hear about the affairs. I hear about parents struggling with children. I hear about dating relationships that have gone awry, broken up. I've heard probably any number of variations of it. I probably heard it in my office. The person who has done wrong, the person who has been wronged has probably been at some point in my office sharing their story. And one day as I was thinking about this, we all have kind of quirky thoughts. I thought, they write a lot of songs glorifying affairs of some sort. They write a bunch of songs, or love gone awry, or love, oh, I'm so desperate for you. I almost debated on bringing in some lyrics to share with you guys, but you all have heard it. I don't even need to repeat it. You all know what that sounds like. You've heard the songs.
The westerns.
Yeah.
She done me wrong.
All the songs. And so I thought, as this is a couple weeks back, which just kind of inspired the sermon. I thought, they never write a song about somebody who, I'm just going to set up a scenario. So they never write the song where maybe somebody starts to have feelings for somebody and they go, oh, that person's married and I really shouldn't do anything with these feelings. They never write that song. They never write the song from the person who's like, I'm not going to interfere. God, take care of these feelings, take them away. That doesn't exist. You know why that song doesn't exist? Because nothing happened. That person took care of those feelings in an appropriate way. They don't write songs like that. And I don't meet people like that in my office that come in and say, I had this thought and then I decided not to do something with it. By the time they're in my office, they've had whatever thought and something has already gone awry, whatever that is. But it made me think, and I actually sat down for a second and I said, what would that song sound like? What would be that story? And I didn't bring the lyrics in. In fact, I don't even know where they are. But I started typing out some what would that sound like? And it ended up kind of being a prayer from a perspective of somebody who's going, okay, God, this is the feelings I don't want to have, especially assuming the person on the other end of this song is a Christian. What do I do with these feelings? Well, I give them to God. And then it ended up being a prayer for that whatever relationship that person's in. Pray for their relationship that it's solid. But nobody writes songs like that. You don't write songs like that. You write the songs where the people have broken it up, or somebody came in, or somebody cheated on somebody. That's what we are used to hearing, right? And here's the thing, though. We don't even bat an eye about that. You hear it, I hear it, we just go, yeah, yep, oh, got a great beat, there goes the song. Or even sometimes in my office when people tell me a story, I'm like, yep, I've heard this story, some variation of it. You all have family, friends, I'm sure acquaintances, variations of the stories that I'm sharing right here. And it got me thinking, wow, that is so wrong. Because that is not the biblical way. And I'm sitting there just going, yeah, that's just the way life is. This is normal. It's not. Or it shouldn't be. But we are surrounded by this every day, and we're surrounded by people that say this is normal. And I'm here to say, and I know this is controversial, and this is going to go out and people are going to probably want to stone me, it's not normal. It is normal, but it's not. Okay? People justify it, but it's not the biblical way, I'll put it that way. If you're in Christ, there is something more and there's something better for you. And that's what I want to address here with the broken relationship. So don't hear this as somebody who's coming at you, judging you, telling you this is what you got to do. You can do whatever you want to do with this information. You can do whatever you want to do in terms of sharing this information with other people. People are going to look at you a little funny and be like, what, you believe that? Whoa, people, this is not the normal. Yeah, because now doing the things the biblical way is the countercultural way. You're a rebel if you're the person going, I'm not going to mess with that person's relationship. Nope, I'm not going to do it. But you know what? People are going to encourage you. Oh, but you like so-and-so so much. Just go. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their status is. Run for your life. Flee for your life. You're the rebel if you're the one that's going, no, that is not God-honoring. You're going to have whatever feelings you're going to have. Does not mean that we have to act on them. So what is happening to us? I want to set this up from not just from the Christian perspective, okay? We're going to look at the Christian perspective, but I want you to take a look at what some people outside of the church are saying about what's our problem, what is happening to us. The first one I wanted to bring to your attention is a guy named John Gottman. He is a researcher for relationships. He's written several books. They're pretty good books, by the way. I actually really have enjoyed them, and I share them with the people I'm talking to. And he looks at a lot of things, but one of the earlier books he wrote was Why Do Marriages Make It and Why Do Marriages Not Make It? And he looked at the people who stayed together, who did well, what were the secrets to that? He called those the masters. And then he looked at the people who he called disasters. Yeah, who didn't do well, it didn't go well. And he did this huge research. Him and his wife have done a lot of research and counseling for folks. And so they're the place to go if you want to kind of see what makes relationships. And if you look at what he says about what makes relationships, as a Christian, as a person that's following Christ, you're not going to go in there and be like, oh, he's saying all these things that I don't believe. You look at them and go, yeah, that makes sense. Like what he has found in the research is what the Bible tells us about what relationships are made of. But what I wanted to point out here too is he's also, when he's looking at the disasters, he has been able to, believe it or not, he's heard enough stories that he can tell you where somebody's at in the process of potentially having an affair. I mean, think about that. He has heard enough stories and they've analyzed it down to the nth degree that he can tell you, okay, from the point at whoever has the affair backwards, he's talked to them and asked them what happened before all this. Do you know where this all starts? Yeah, it starts right up here. It starts with someone's thought process before it ever gets there. It never, I'm sure we all know it never just suddenly goes, oops, had an affair, oops. No, it starts right here. And I was just blown away when I saw the steps to that because I was like, oh man, I need to be talking to some of my folks about this and looking at it. You need to check where you're at in this process because if you've gone outside the thoughts and start thinking about and ruminating on this, you're on your way to acting on something you may or may not want to be acting on. So that was one thing that blew my mind, problem. The second one, some of you heard pieces of this, and I'm going to take it a little bit further. But some of you heard in Sabbath school last week, I was mentioning Pew Research, and they have done some studies on Christian dating. And one of the stats that you guys heard from me was they were asking Christians versus non-Christians, how many dates before it's okay to have sex with somebody. Non-Christians said 3. Okay. Probably no surprise. The surprise, not for those of you who are in Sabbath school because you already know the number, the surprise was that they asked Christians and they said 3. And I was looking at that going, what? Shouldn't, if we're saying we're Christians, shouldn't that affect the way that we're living our lives? And yet, the research is showing, no, for many people are just following suit. And finally, the Institute for Family Studies did some research on a very, very big problem that I'm just going to highlight because it fits in here. And that is the problem with pornography. So they did some research and they asked over, last month how many people were using it. And the number probably is not going to shock anybody. In fact, I thought, well, this is a little low. The number over the last month of people who admitted using it was about 40% of men, 11% of women. I thought, well, that's kind of low. But lifetime use, 58%. So over half the population that they asked this question to said, yeah, at some point I've viewed or looked at this. That's still kind of a high number. And of course, that's assuming that people are admitting to this. And then I just heard the other day, and this wasn't from these guys, this was another study that was done. And these folks were going to study college students because they were worried about the effects of pornography on the brain. Because they said, this is a principle from the Bible too. Whatever you behold, right, is what you become. And so they were concerned that, man, we are becoming a culture where we're seeing all these things, seeing things really sexualized. And they said, we were going to go to this college. We were going to go try to, especially, sorry, men, you guys have the highest numbers. This probably is not a shock to us. I think a lot of us know this. You guys are more prone to get caught up in this. Like I said, 44% of men versus 11% of women. It's a problem. But anyway, so I went to the college and they went and talked to young men. And they were trying to see if they could figure out with a control group and experimental group, like how this was affecting the brain. Do you want to know why they couldn't conduct the study? They couldn't find enough men to be in the control group. They could not find enough men to be a control group at the colleges that they were at who didn't engage in pornography. I was blown away by that, and I was just like, well, this just proves the point that we are getting at. We have a problem as a society. And you want to know what the name is? We call that problem lust. Now, some of you are going to look at that word and be like, oh, okay, we're going there. We already know we're going there. We're being real today. We're not sugarcoating it today. This is the problem, folks. And you know, when you go look up this word in the Bible and you look it up, you find it also all over the place in our Bible. But there's going to be more to it than just this word. When you look at this word and you think about what does this mean, the word actually can have a little bit broader definition than what I'm going to give you. But basically, it tends to be something along the lines of a strong craving, and we tend to give that sexual connotations. But it can be a little bit broader than that. But basically, it's a strong craving, okay? Craving meaning you don't have to do something with it, but a strong desire. But we are living in a world where your desire is what you're going to act on, is what we're being told, right? That's what we're setting ourselves up for. But here's the thing. Solomon once told us, there's nothing new under the sun. This is not necessarily a new problem. It's a very old problem. Now, we have different ways of getting ourselves in trouble at this point, but there are several men in the Bible. We're going to use men because y'all are written all over in here, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot less women mentioned with these stories. But I'm going to tell you something. These stories, I know you know them, but I want you to think about them in terms of where this led the folks. So our first person we're looking at is Samson. And I'm not going to read through all of them. I'm just going to highlight them. We all know Samson as the strong guy, right? And I want you to think about this too. Not only was he strong, he was actually smart. I know sometimes we think of him as like he's dumb and he's just this big tough guy. But there's no way that God would have allowed him to be a judge. That was his job if he didn't have some level of smartness, okay? But let's be real. He was dumb when it came to women. All right? So he was pretty smart in some areas. He was not so great in other areas. And we see him first getting involved with women is in Judges 14. And this is when he sees this Philistine woman, and he actually tells his parents, and I want you to think about this too. He saw her. He just sees her. He's like, ooh, she looks good. I want her for my wife. And he goes to his parents, and he's like, I want this particular person. And his parents, rightly so, are like, isn't there somebody here among our people that you could marry instead? What are they saying here, right? Like, in essence, he's going to marry, sometimes of us who have Christian needs think of this as like he's marrying out of the faith or trying to. And his parents are like, can't you find somebody more equally yoked here? But he's like, nope, this is who I want it done now. He's pretty demanding, and his parents give in. And we know from that whole story, it doesn't go well. It goes awry. He sort of gets married to her, but not really, because the whole festival, there's this whole riddle thing, and they guess it, and the wife, that should have been his first indicator, or soon-to-be wife, gets it out of him and gives it to the people to guess, and he gets so mad and destroys things. Surprise, surprise, they counter what he does, and basically his wife gets given to somebody else. I think eventually, if you look further, it ends very poorly for all involved, because I do also believe that she burns up as well. Does not end well. So as if we didn't already have enough proof right there, we see Samson again in chapter 16 in the most famous story, or one of the most famous stories about lust in the Bible, Samson and Delilah. Okay, whenever you hear that name, we tend to, those of us with biblical mindset, hear Delilah and go, ooh. It's not usually a name that folks are using for their kids, but sometimes. We're not saying everybody with that name out there, that is the case. But this story is so prevalent when you think about this. This same thing happens to Samson. You want to talk about a pattern? You want to talk about habit, being stuck on something? This time, no parents are involved. But he's been a judge for many, many years. He sees this other woman. Yep. Okay. He thinks he loves her. And what's the bottom line? What happens in that? She does the same thing, slightly different how she does it. Same thing that the previous wife to be did as well. She betrays him to the enemy ultimately. You want to talk about the consequences, the steps to your life imploding or exploding, whichever direction you want to go. Samson did it. But he's not alone. We can go over to Solomon and 1 Kings 11. And actually, I'm just going to make a broad statement on Solomon. And I'm sure you all know this number. So Solomon, wisest king on earth. Starting to see a pattern here. Wisest king on earth. Also very dumb when it came to women. So he decides early on, all right, I need to make some alliances with people. How do people, especially in these kingdoms, make alliances with each other? You marry into the family. So the first one he marries is an Egyptian. Fast forward, by the time we get to 1 Kings 11, and we're told of all the things that he's done, we get a number, some staggering number, I don't even have it right in front of me, of, at this point he has 1,000 wives, concubines, whatever. 1,000. You can't even spend one day a year with them. I mean, if you tried to rotate people, which I know that's not how they made that work, if you try to rotate even visiting with these people, these wives, concubines, I mean, you're 3 to 4 years out. I'll pencil you on my books and see you in 4 years, honey. Like, I know that's not how he did that, but I mean, think about the insaneness of that. And he's supposed to be the wisest man on earth.
Women.
Yeah, a lot of downfall there, okay? All right, I'm just pained even saying that. But think about where he came from. 2 Samuel 11:2 is probably, if not the most, which I claimed that to be on Samson's story, the second most. Or vice versa. They're probably up there in your head. You probably thought that's exactly the stories I was going to. And what is that story? Who is that story of? This is his father, David. Unfortunately, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. And in David's story, David, who's king, sees a beautiful woman. One day, decides, I want to take her for mine. All right, he has the added complication of she is married. You want to talk about an affair? This is it. She's married, and not only is she married, she's married to one of his best friends. Does this not sound like a story you have heard here? I've heard this story in some variation. Maybe not a king, but some variation, somebody's best whatever gets in the middle of somebody's relationship. This is David. David did this exact thing, right? And he goes, gets her, sleeps with her, etc., gets her pregnant, and has to try to cover this up. Exploding, imploding. The child ends up dying. The husband is killed, all because of David's first steps and lusting after a woman that was not his. It ends poorly. I think thus far, I probably don't even need to the fourth one. Every time we're looking at a story, it doesn't end well. It doesn't mean that it like implodes or explodes right that moment on somebody, but it never ends well. The last story I'm going to bring to your attention, you might go, why is he in here? Let's go to Adam. You might look at it and go, how did Adam get in here? What has Adam done? Is there a hidden story about Adam that I don't know? No, you know the story, but I hope to bring it to you in a different light. So Adam's in here. And I don't drop my stuff here. Because here's the thing. At the fall, when Eve is tricked, which a lot of us know this, we know the consequences of what happened. Here's what it says about her being tricked. This is verse 6 and where Adam was. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eye and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. There's that word, desired. So she was wanting something to be wise. She took its fruit, ate it, and she gave also some of it to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And you might wonder, was he standing right there? What was going on? Most likely, I've done a little bit of research on this, heard some people talk on this. He probably wasn't like right next to her as the servant's talking to her, but he's somewhere in the vicinity. So Ellen White says about this particular moment, she says, here's the problem for Adam. By the time Adam is there, and she's handing the fruit to him. Eve was tricked, but Adam knew better. By the time he's getting this fruit into his hands, it says the reason he ate the fruit is he's going, I cannot live without her. I can't live without this woman. We're going to take the consequences together. I mean, it sounds really noble kind of when you think of that, but at the same time, you're like, no, because we live in this world of sin. That was his thinking. What's the problem with that? Who should he have been focused on? God. But he's focused on her and this apple, and I can't live without you. But here you want to talk about things quickly going from the worst. It's not too many verses later. This is in verse 12, when God goes to find them. Does this not sound like a love song, though? Like, I can't live without you, honey? Like, okay, I can't live without you. I'm so desperate for you. God comes to find them, says, what are you guys up to? What have you been doing? He knows, but he wants to talk with them. And he hears their, whatever they want to tell him. And he talks to Adam, and Adam says this. Remember, I can't live without you. The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate it. Whoa, sin came in, boom, we went from, I can't live without you, honey, to, whoop, she's it, not me. This story, I've come to think of, highlights for me what all of these stories have about them. The problem with lust is actually not, she made me do it, or he made me do it, or whatever. The problem is, Immediately, Adam's response after sin, no, it doesn't matter what happens to her now, it's about saving my own skin. Every single one of these stories that we just saw was about somebody else's I want, I need, whatever's in the wrong direction. Now, David Ashrick said this. David Ashrick does A Rise. You guys probably know him. And I saw this quote, and I thought, this is fabulous. And he said this, not all sin is murder, but all sin is murderous in intent. Think about that for a second. Okay, so he's going back and he's going, no, not every sin that you can commit is murder. But at the root of every single one of those is self. If it came down to it, whatever sin I'm committing, I'm basically putting myself ahead of you and I can get rid of you. I'm just trying to save myself. Murderous in intent. So you don't have to be on the far end of, I'm going to go commit an affair for this to be a problem. So here's the biblical take on this, just a couple verses, just in case we weren't already clear about the stories that we did. Solomon wrote in his later years, Proverbs 6:25. He got a little smarter. I think he got a little wiser as he got older. He said this, do not lust in your heart after her beauty or let her captivate you with her eyes. That is pretty direct. That is pretty darn direct. Do not focus on, hone in on, look at, no. He says, just don't do it. Now, he's talking in context here. He's actually talking to a young man, his son, and talking about prostitutes that were in the area. And he's saying, don't even go there. And then Paul writes this in 1 Thessalonians 4:3-5. It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. That's pretty clear. He's going, if you are saying, I'm a Christian and I'm walking on this journey with God, your life should reflect that. And he's saying you should exercise one of the fruits of the Spirit, which is self-control. Over your own being, you should exercise that. And he makes a clear distinction. You should avoid all sexual immorality. He's lumping this all together. Avoid all of that. That is not what the Christian walk is about. Now, let's be clear for a moment. It's not to say that obviously God created sex and that there's an appropriate place for this, but he is talking about out of the lines that God has created that to be in. So this is why he can say that. He said, you need to control. Exodus 20:14-17. This is right there in the Ten Commandments. We're learning, we're seeing lust is an inside job, right? And it says, first we see, you shall not, well, this is not the first one that you, well, yeah, it is the first one you see because it's 7. Seventh commandment says, you shall not commit adultery. That's pretty straightforward. And you can look at that and you could be like, okay, especially like somebody like me, be like, well, I'm not married, so I can do whatever I want. I'm not committing adultery as long as the person's not married or whatever. That's not exactly the intent of this thing here. It's certainly very clear, but a couple years back when we did the study on this and did the sermon on this, we really broke this down further. But he doesn't leave it just at that, in case you just want to be like, oh, well, okay, I'm never going to do that. The very last commandment says this: you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And Jesus answered that question very well. Who is my neighbor? So it doesn't mean the person just living right next door to you. He very clearly outlines internal, external, internal, external. Yep, don't commit these actions, but guard what is happening in your mind. Do not covet these other people. 1 John 2:16 says, for everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of the life come not from the Father, but from the world. I thought this was a good one, too, to remind us. Who is this coming from? Who are these attacks coming from? It's not because God is like trying to tempt you and put all these things out and cause problems for you. It's Satan. It's the enemy. We're in a battle zone. We're in a war zone, right? Because there's a war going on. And so John makes that really clear. It's not coming from God. And then, of course, we know very famously what Jesus said about lustfulness. This is 5:28, Matthew 5:28. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in her heart. And this fits so well with what John Gottman had pointed out when he was saying all these steps leading to somebody acting on that start with somebody thinking about somebody else in the wrong direction. So in the end, I want us to take a look, though. Those 4 men that I mentioned, because I do not want to leave us with, like, it's all horrible, and it's all awful, and we live in a terrible world. There's hope. There's hope. If we look at Samson, you know what? In Hebrews 11, we saw him a while ago when I was preaching on this. He was counted as faithful in Hebrews 11. After those stories that I just told you, something clicked, and he returned to God. And in fact, it said at his death, he killed more Philistines than during his life, which is what God was trying to get him to do, to listen to what he wanted him to do. And he's counted as one of the faithful. The man had problems. Solomon, we know, returns to God in his old age, because we see that when we hear him in Ecclesiastes, we see it in Proverbs, and he starts coming around and going, ooh, don't do these things. I have tried all these different things. They do not hold meaning for you. What holds meaning for you is your relationship with God. David, still, after all the things that he did, was considered a man after God's own heart. Still, why was he? Because once he was confronted, when the prophet confronted him, we have that beautiful psalm, Psalms 51. He knew and he repented. He suffered the consequences of it, but he didn't choose to keep going down that path. Now, he faced, like I said, faced a lot of consequences from it, and it was not easy. And then even Adam, after the fall, we know Adam looked forward to deliverance or to a Messiah. Like even after that, he continued to look forward to a time where he would be free again. So what can we learn here? I don't want to leave you with this, just that. God desires more for us in our relationships. That's very clearly outlined in the Bible. God wants more for us. He doesn't want us to just be casually here, there, commit here, there, oh, maybe not, etc. And also that he created us for that desire for relationships. So if we have a desire for a relationship, that's God-given. We are meant to be together. But here's the thing, healthy relationships. And if we're not sure what that is, we're not clear about that, in upcoming sermons, we're going to talk a little bit about what does that actually look like. And then, as we learned very clearly with the 4 men that we saw, when we make mistakes, there is forgiveness. There is absolutely forgiveness for all of us. And we saw that really clearly in the stories that we saw here. God wants for us to do things his way. And the reason he wants us to do them his way, because it's better. It really is better. If you're not sure, what does the Bible say about that? Ask. Ask for that. How can I do this your way, God? Show me how to have relationships that are healthy and honoring to you.